Good afternoon, and thank you all for coming here this afternoon to work with us as we focus on the development of our strategic plan that we're preparing for the submission to CMS on or about January 1. And you've been working with us to give us some advice in that process, and we're starting to dive into that development. So we appreciate all of your support and help during this important planning for the progression of our model. I want to ask everybody to introduce themselves and as we go around the room here, and there may be some folks on the phone. As a reminder, we do record our meetings, and so it's helpful to have just an introduction of who's here. I did especially just want to note that we have Dr. Cha here today from CMMI, and Dr. Cha heads up the state innovation group, and he's the man in charge of our contract with CMS. So in our agreement, and we work with him regularly. We meet with him and his staff regularly. We also have another of our team from CMMI here in the audience today. Will Daniel is in the back of the room here, and he is the key staff who works with us constantly on our model. So I just wanted to make special note that they're coming here today to help contribute to our planning process. And with that, maybe we can go around and introduce ourselves briefly.
Jack Meyer, HMA, and I'll be facilitating today.
Howard Heft, I'm the Deputy Secretary for Public Health Services for the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene.
I'm Carmela Coyle, and I serve as President and CEO of the Maryland Hospital Association.
Ben Steffen, the Maryland Healthcare Commission.
Bob Krenzik, CEO of the University of Maryland Medical System.
Vince Ancona, President of Maryland.
Peggy Nalepa, CEO and President of Peninsula Regional Health System.
Lenny Preston, Consumer Health First, formerly Maryland Women's Coalition for Healthcare Reform.
I'm Tom Walsh. I'm a primary care physician with Maryland Primary Care Physicians.
Gene Ransom with MedChi, the Maryland State Medical Society.
Hi, Nazzy First with Lifespan.
Vinnie DeMarco, Maryland Citizens Health Initiative.
Kevin Sexton, I'm the CEO at Holy Cross Health.
Steve Chung.
Shirley Gurevich, HSCRC.
Jeff Gracie, Health Management Associates.
And I'd also just like to introduce a couple of folks in the audience who've been working with us and are working with us on the strategic plan. If Jess and Liz, if you want to just stand up and introduce yourself briefly. But these ladies are working with the commission staff to get the strategic plan completed, and they're both doctors to be in the future. They're working with us for the next year as we focus on our strategic plan. So you want to introduce yourself?
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Jess. I went to Hopkins for undergrad and been with the HSCRC for a year now, working closely with CMMI. And I'll be continuing for another year here at HSCRC, and I'll be attending the University of Maryland Medical School next year. Hi everyone, my name is Liz Patika. I'm between my third and fourth year at medical school at the Mayo Clinic, and completed my MPH at Johns Hopkins, and I started this week. I'll be working on the strategic plan initiative, and I'm contracted with HMA for the next year.
Thank you. Are there any folks on the phone who are participating via webinar?
Yeah, hi, it's Bruce Vladeck from New York, a consultant in New York.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I think at the last meeting we were having a discussion about CPC Plus and whether plans were going to file in Maryland, et cetera. And so Howard Haft has been working with DHMH and with Shannon and Medicaid have been following that issue, and Howard's going to kind of give us an update on that, and also just kind of some of the states thinking about primary care direction.
Donna, thank you very much. And importantly for our budding medical students, the future we're creating right here, this is important information. And I wanted to start out by saying that the department is very, very interested and focused on the future of healthcare, obviously for the state. Our role is to provide health and well-being for every Marylander, and we certainly can't do that without having an adequate healthcare workforce and healthcare delivery throughout the state. So as part of the focus on that, we have a great number of tools in the department. Two of them that I noticed were adjacent but unaligned were our Office of Primary Care and Rural Health and our Office of Population Health Improvement. And although they were under the same umbrella, they were at opposite sides of the umbrella. And I think to all of us here, you would know that there's a natural association between primary care, rural health, and population health that should not be torn asunder. It should be united. So we've done that in the organizational chart, and over the next weeks, months, and years, we'll be really leveraging the talents and the abilities and the resources within those two divisions to work together as one combined office, really focused on how to enhance population health in the state and improve the health of the state, but very focused on doing that first and foremost through strengthening our primary care infrastructure. We'll be doing that in many ways by training, recruiting, retaining, and also creating models that will make it conducive to have primary care thrive in the future of healthcare in the state. So very appropriate to that would be things like care redesign, coordinated care management, the payment reform that we're struggling with now, a focus on not only quality but standardization of quality metrics so that the reporting models for our primary care providers can be simplified and make them more focused in their efforts. And we have before us now many models. I think what I'd like to do now is just spend just a few minutes and give you an update on where we are with the CPC Plus model, which has been discussed at this advisory board previously, and now is in process of development. On this slide, you can see that the model was announced as recently as April. Now it seems like a lifetime ago, but it really was only perhaps 2 months. And the payers will be selected in July. As you know, that this is a very selective program with 20 regions in the state, 20 regions of the country, only permitted. And the first level of entry into this was selecting payers who were willing and able to participate in the program. After the payers are selected in October, the practices to be incorporated into that program to be selected, and there's a planned launch date for January of 2017. As you know, 2 Maryland payers submitted applications in this year, and if you look at the next slide, you can see those 2 were Care First, is not represented here today, and AmeriGroup, which are represented. And if they are awarded a demonstration project, that really gives us, in many ways, a leg up on a new model, a bona fide model from CMS that is a multi-payer model, as one of the paths forward. And that could be leveraged into broadening exactly that model, but there's also the opportunity of adding additional models, which I think some of which you've been exposed to in the past, and some which I'm sure we're being cooked as we speak right now. But in the event that they're not awarded, that is not doom and gloom. I think the CPC Plus model still has some opportunities to exist in the future of healthcare in the state as an independent model. That certainly would depend on a number of factors that are unknown to us, including the granting of that ability by CMS to make that a model for Maryland going forward. So on the next slide, it leads us simply to the questions of at hand. And if Maryland payers are awarded the CPC Plus, how should we leverage that? How can we make that, which is a defined number of primary care providers in that program, how can we leverage that to incorporate all or as many willing primary care providers would be willing to do that? Is there a way to take that finite number and make it an infinite number or a sufficient number to incorporate all who want to join that? And if that happened, how would that be staged? And among other considerations, how that would fit into MACRA and other considerations that we're looking at in the very near future. And if, on the other hand, if we don't get that award, what should we do? Should we pursue a Maryland-specific model or multiple Maryland-specific models? And if we do either or any of those things, what are the resources that we'll need to leverage those to make this a really comprehensive plan that fits into total cost of care going forward and better care for all the citizens of Maryland in the future? So I think that those are pretty weighty questions, and they're things that I think we're wrestling with now. But there also are, there's two things about those questions that I think are important. And on the next slide, I want to point out that these foundational programs, these primary care focused programs, are really the heart of patient-centered value-based care, that we can't escape that. And I always reflect back on history, because if you don't understand and know history, you're doomed and condemned to repeat it. And as early as 1760s, John Gregory, who was the first physician to King George III, decided that in London at that time, and Scotland, that there was an overabundance in the medical community of self-interest. Self-interest took the place of all of the focus on patient care. And he very clearly described what has been the mainstay of healthcare, professional healthcare, physicians' ethics for the future. And he simply said that the physicians, and I would say as a surrogate, all providers of healthcare should have a primary fiduciary responsibility to the patients. And prestige and remuneration and all those other things that happen are really secondary to our focus on the patients. And sometimes, and I'm not saying it's necessarily now, but sometimes we get off the track of that and we focus more on self-interest than we do on the interests of our patients. And perhaps if we go back to the beginning and refocus our interests all along the way on what's in the patient's best interest, we'll come up with models, good models that will serve us all well and be sustainable into the future. And I think T.S. Eliot also sort of echoed that in one of the famous lines of his poem that starts out, we shall not cease from our exploration, and in the end, we'll return to the place that we started and know it for the first time. So I'll leave you with those sort of thoughts to mull on during the course of this conversation. Thank you for your time.
Now we're going to ask Dr. Cha to share his thoughts with us, and he has a lot of opinions on primary care, so I'm hoping that he'll really share them with us today, but also share some of his thoughts on our strategic planning process. I'll give you the clicker.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me here. I think this is the second or third time I've been with all of you to talk about the Maryland model. Just to begin, we're tremendously excited about the progress to date in our partnership with you all, and want to credit the folks in this room, and Donna in particular, and the other and Howard and the folks from both the state and HSCRC in terms of just the amount of work that goes down and the partnership that is so clear in terms of our conversations with them, the partnership that's so clear with all of you in terms of thinking about what Maryland needs to look like today, what it needs to look like in the future. It's very clear, and we're committed to the vision that you're outlining as well. I'm going to start off talking a little bit about, broadly speaking, where the department is heading, just to take one quick step back, because I think you're a key piece of the story. We talk about you a lot, and not just Maryland, but in a lot of our national conversations in terms of how we can structure the flow. And I want you to understand how you fit into that national picture. I'm going to start there, talk a little bit about primary care, and then end with some Maryland-specific ideas for next steps. So let's start with the department. In January of 2015, the Secretary announced goals for value-based payments and alternative payment models in Medicare. And what she said at the time, and I'm just going to focus on the alternative payment models for a second here, that's at goal 1 on the slide, that 30% of our Medicare payments will be tied to quality or value through alternative payment models by the end of 2016. And these are substantially models that have a substantial accountability for quality and value, and wanted to get there by the end of 2016. I think we announced at the beginning of this year that we actually hit this goal 11 months early, and it was actually the President himself who announced this. This is a clear commitment of this administration to think about how we can move this nation towards alternative payment models, because we believe it's better for our bottom line, but more importantly, we believe it's better for our beneficiaries. So that progress is remarkable, particularly when you think about the context of the fact that that 30% number that we just hit was 0 in 2011. So just think about the rapid pace of change that's happening around the country for the Medicare program writ large. The other piece I want to focus on in this slide is that right hand of the slide, which is to say, she was essentially saying, I'm leading with the Medicare program and setting goals for the Medicare program because that's the lever I probably have the most control over. But the most important thing about this is the partnership with the nation. And I'm inviting all the stakeholders, this is what the Secretary was saying, to join me in this effort. Consumers, businesses, payers, providers, state partners. And this has evolved into what we now call the Healthcare Planning, Learning and Action Network. And it's to continue to not only say, are these goals right for the nation, but also, more importantly, what should we be actually doing to achieve these goals? What kind of quality metric alignment should we be thinking about? What kind of benchmarking ideas should we be thinking about? A very vibrant discussion happening there about helping guide the nation around principles around how to best get this topic and this goal done. So in other words, the department has said very clearly, we've set this as a goal. The Secretary has made this, and the President has made this a clear goal for this administration. Congress came along in 2015 with the Medicare Access and CHIP Reauthorization Act. Long bill, lots of slides, lots of materials. We just issued a rule on NPRM, which is numbering in the hundreds and hundreds of pages. Not going to go through the whole thing, but I do want to highlight a couple pieces, and I think there are lots of questions in Maryland about how this fits in. So let me just say that our goal over the course of Maryland is to ensure that you are, in fact, aligned with the parameters of the Quality Payment Program. What the Quality Payment Program does in particular, it says that there are options for providers, physicians specifically, non-hospital providers under the Quality Payment Program. And it creates a 5% bonus option for practitioners who can become qualified practitioners in what we call an advanced alternative payment model. I don't want to belabor that at length. Again, it's a much more complex topic. Happy to come back and talk about that another day and bring along some more experts. But I just wanted to say very clearly there that as a symbolic notion that what the Secretary said in terms of we want to get to alternative payment models, Congress has put real hard Medicare dollars on the table, 5% bonus for physicians who can, in fact, engage and have a substantial proportion of their payments exchanged through one of these advanced alternative payment models. We want to leverage that to your advantage here in Maryland, and we think we can do that. But I think the bottom line point for the first two slides is that the Secretary set goals. Congress has put real dollars on the table. We believe at the end of the day that it's states like Maryland and it's the state platform that can actually substantially achieve these goals. We think, frankly, it's going to be really challenging for physicians across the country to jump straight into an advanced alternative payment model. We hope this happens, but we recognize it's a challenging goal. We know and we want to help support states like you to really get there in a substantial way. Let me talk briefly about state innovation models. These are grants that we've issued to states across the country to test the ability of state governments to utilize policy and regulatory levers to accelerate healthcare transformation. I'm not going to talk at length, but just take a look at the color on the slide. The point is that over 60% of the nation's population is thinking about the state-based model as a way to think about promoting reform. And under these efforts, we're making progress. And I think the first bullet point, it's a busy slide, but I just want to make this first bullet point very clear, which is that we have seen none of our SIM states engage in reform that does not include primary care infrastructure transformation. It just hasn't happened. And that's not because CMS has required that. That is not something that is part of the SIM requirements. It's because every state has taken this on and has said to us, we think this is a core piece of transformation. And I think that takes various forms, right? I think that we are seeing in Arkansas a primary patient-centered medical home wrapped up alongside an episode bundle, wrapped up with some sort of payment incentives. We're seeing $34 million in cost avoidance from the Medicaid program for 136 practices that are enrolled in that program. Small program, already seeing substantial savings, and part of that is being shared with providers. We're seeing successes in Maine in terms of a PCMH or a Medicaid health home. We're seeing non-emergent EDUs decrease by 14% so far. And these are state reported results. These are not final determinative evaluation, but this is what the states are feeding back to us. We're seeing in the state of Vermont a robust patient-centered medical home model that involves community care teams and social determinants of health reduce expenditures by as much as $19 million, again, in a small state, small targeted number of practices, substantial savings. So in other words, the point of this bullet is that it's not just that we believe in it, we're seeing early returns in terms of state reports back to us. Not going to spend a lot of time on the rest of the slide, but just to say the other steps are thinking about ensuring that the right incentives are there for providers, ensuring how we're thinking about the population as a whole, and finally investing in data infrastructure. And I want to be very clear, this is not something that CMMI said to our SIM states, you have to do this. This is our learning the lessons of what our states have chosen to do with our SIM investments. I'm going to talk briefly, and I think Howard covered some of this, so I'm happy to come back to this in question, but we've, as you know, have the CPC model in existence, the comprehensive primary care model in existence. We recently announced a comprehensive primary care plus model to test a new payment and care transformation model for primary care. But the bottom line, and I think this is echoed on the prior slide, we agree with our states. We think primary care transformation, I think we've said this in various public forums, we think primary care transformation is the keystone to successful payment and delivery reform. We think that it's really hard to think about making a lot of traction without thinking about how we're making this transformation, not because there's magic to primary care, but because it's that interface with our beneficiaries. It's that how we think about how care delivery is actually transformed that is key to payment transformation. We can't simply just pay differently and expect everything else to happen. There's got to be an understanding that we have to invest in the transformation we hope to see. So, and in that, it's more than that collection of IT tools. I think that there are various definitions of what the words PCMH get used, primary care transformation. We use the term comprehensive primary care, but we really emphasize in the primary care, in the comprehensive primary care initiative, a couple key points about access and continuity. It's about care management. It's about patient and caregiver engagement, about planned care and population health, and it's about comprehensiveness and coordination. A lot of buzzwords on the slide, and again, happy to talk more about that in questions, but just to say it has got to be more than just simply a per member per month payment and some IT requirements. There's got to be something that is actually fundamentally transforming in terms of how we're delivering care. And it's that idea that it's more than payment transformation that led us to the policy change to say, initially we had said no SSP and CPC. And I think we were convinced by some of the discussions to say, really, this is about care transformation. SSP is a little bit more of a payment model. These can coexist, and so we created parameters to really think about how these two initiatives could work together. One last slide on primary care transformation, transitioning to thinking about the Maryland. So when we announced a state innovation group-based model for Medicare participation. And this was stemming off the Maryland success. And after we launched the model with you, we turned around to the rest of the country and said, we invite you to bring your ideas for what it means for Medicare to transform their payments in accordance with the state-based model. We're in discussion with multiple states right now. I think most publicly, Vermont and Pennsylvania have been reported on in the news that we're talking to them. Again, we have not signed anything. I hope we can get there, but I don't know. But the point is that we're trying to think about how do we build on some of the work that we've had with you to think about this. Again, it comes back to the same fundamental points. How do we align with CMMI models, particularly primary care models, and what is it that's different about the state customized path where Medicare would pursue with you? The state in particular. So you're going to hear this theme again and again, and I think it even goes back to the Secretary's initiative that it's got to be both payment transformation and care delivery transformation. It cannot be one or the other, but it's got to be both pieces at the same time. And the last piece of that leg, by the way, in the Secretary's vision was information system transformation. We think those three pieces, the payment is often what we focus on, often what the news focuses on. I think we often forget that it's got to be predicated on building on substantial building blocks that make that incentive successful. And we're particularly excited about this prospect of state design models with an all-payer participation. It's an important contribution of state design models throughout the country, as I said, and CPC has been a close partnership with us. We meet with them standing meeting every couple of weeks, but I talk to them probably at least once, twice a week, every other day. I mean, we're in ongoing engagement. How is CPC and SIM working together because of that integration? Let me turn specifically to Maryland. I think you all know the stuff on the slide, that you've committed to save $330 by the end of 2015. It looks like we're getting all the way up to $250 million, which is fantastic. I think you've made commitments to make improvements in the quality of care. We think we're making progress on those. To your credit, you've had a drastic transformation in terms of revenues moving to global budgets, far exceeded the requirements in the all-payer agreement. And that in particular has been a real sign of your state's commitment to the model and really exciting in terms of the scale that you're getting in the state. Let me talk for 1 second about total cost of care. The all-payer model does not commit you to reduce total cost of care. I just want to be perfectly honest about that, but there are several guardrails that are required under the agreement. One is that if Maryland total cost of care exceeds the growth rate of national total cost of care by more than 1 percentage point in any given year, it triggers a corrective action plan. If Maryland's total cost of care exceeds growth rate of national by any amount in 2 consecutive years, that also triggers a corrective action plan. So this might be the first time, I'm not sure you're seeing this, but in 2015, we're seeing that Maryland total cost of care growth exceeded national by about 0.7 percentage points.
That's Medicare.
That's Medicare, correct. That does not trigger a corrective action plan. And in fact, we can make an argument that in terms of the ongoing hospital-based nature of your prior system, this might be a natural correction of the market towards post-acute care settings in terms of thinking about other sectors of care where the state has maybe held a lot within the hospital because of the uniqueness of your hospital system. This might be a natural course correction, or it may be a signal of potential gaming. I don't know which one it is. I'm not going to make any statement in terms of whether this is a good or bad thing in terms of 0.7 percentage points, but it is something that we need to keep an eye on, which leads us to the next slide. And I want to be very clear. Under the agreement, and this is a direct quote, Maryland will submit a proposal for a new model which shall limit at a minimum the Medicare, this is to your question, per beneficiary total cost of care. That's what the agreement commits you to in terms of by the end of this year. And the plan for that is due by the end of this year. But let's forget that for a second. I think there's been a lot of discussion about what is or isn't required from a CMS perspective. I don't want to get into that discussion from a legalistic standpoint, what we will consider checking off this box or not. I want Maryland to be successful. And in that framework, we believe that primary care transformation is central to the future of Maryland. And we hope to work with you not only to include that in a plan, but to actually think about how we move to that vision. And I'll talk about what that time frame might look like. So the hospital model was intended to promote faster delivery system reform. And we think you're absolutely getting there, but we need to continue to rapidly evolve. That total cost of care may be a good thing, it may be a bad thing. I don't know, and I don't want to be put in a position where I have to determine whether or not that is a good thing. I want to move to a framework where we're getting the kinds of outcomes from the system in support of beneficiaries. And I think this goes back to your talk, Howard, in terms of what we hope to achieve out of that, where we're not getting into an argument about whether 0.7 is or is not a right thing. I want to get into a framework where we're really structuring a system that's incenting the kinds of outcomes for all the beneficiaries that we want to see. We hope that we can come to consensus on a primary care transformation by the end of this year. And that may be something that is a robust goal, and I know that may be faster than some of you may have anticipated before I open my mouth. But I want to be clear that there's two reasons. Number one, we think that's critical as a building block for the future of Maryland. There's a direct financial piece here too, which is I don't know whether or not the gain sharing amendment that we're going to talk about and that we're hoping to clear about through this year will or will not get you into, again, that advanced alternative payment model. That's that jargon from the quality payment program that I talked about in that second slide. I want to be sure that we are aligning you and your providers to have every shot at that 5% Medicare bonus, which starts in 2019 based on data in 2017. And so I think what I'm saying to you is that I don't know whether we get there with the gain sharing, but the faster we can get to a primary care model, I believe that we can work with you to partner and ensure that that primary care model does in fact align with those quality payment bonuses to get that 5% bonus. That's 2018 data. That would be a 2020 payment. So I don't know whether, and let me say again, I don't know whether the current model or the gain sharing will get you into a framework of an advanced alternative payment model that gets you the 5% bonus. But I sure as heck know that I have a clear shot at it if we could work together on a primary care transformation model. And so I want to keep this on a fast track to be sure that we have every opportunity to benefit not only the physicians of Maryland, but also the beneficiary benefits that come with a primary care transformation. We do still need to talk about some sort of concept for total cost of care, and that brings us to the last slide. So in 2017, this is the progression as we're seeing it. 2017, I think you all have probably heard from Howard and Donna about the gain sharing model as we're talking about it. Some care redesign program with gain sharing. The state has submitted that amendment to create two programs, the community-based and one hospital-based care redesign program, and we're thinking about how the gain sharing fits in. We support that focus. We support your efforts. We're working to move that through the process. We would love to kick that off as soon as possible, but realistically, it may be 2017 when we launch that model. But we can talk more about that timing. I think we're still in process in terms of getting that through the process and navigating the clearance process. So hopefully, at a minimum, launch in 2017. The next step is what I just mentioned, that we would like to work with you through the course of this year, frankly, to think about what a primary care transformation vision might look like. And let me be very clear, I don't think that has to be one thing. I think there's almost certainly going to be a range of options, but I want to work with you to develop a program that we can move through our clearance process so that has a potential to launch in 2018 to give your physicians every opportunity to draw down that 5% bonus. Alongside that trail of, we can think about also not just the primary care transformation. I know you all have talked about post-acute care, geographic transformations. We can think about how that might go in that same package in terms of moving through clearance through the close of this year and maybe early next. But what I can tell you is that it takes us time to modify our payment practices. Often our standards quote is it takes us a year to get through the process in terms of actually making the change processes happen. So for 2018, that backs us up to getting to some sort of resolution by 2017. That means really thinking about you all coming to consensus by the end of this year. And in 2019, that total cost of care plan, I think this has been something we've been talking about since the start. And I think, whether it's a plan for a plan, I know all those discussions have come up. What I want to see through the close of this year, particularly if we can work together on a primary care transformation, is enough of a vision so that what we build in that primary care transformation doesn't have to be picked apart again when we go to 2019. It's only a year away. So enough of a framework so that it fits and is consistent with both the gain sharing efforts, your GBR, and your primary care model, so we don't have to continually build and rebuild. So I don't know what that means in terms of your discussions about a plan or a plan for a plan, but I think there's a realistic necessity to say if we're going to shoot for a primary care transformation, let's be sure that we build it once and don't have to take it apart in 2019. So to the degree that you have to flesh out details about what that vision is in 2019, that would be something and a logic that I'd hope that we can get to by the close of this year. I know that's an aggressive time frame. I just want to be very clear about an aggressive time frame. I will also say, and we will say this with CMS leadership later this summer, I think we had said to you all last year that we needed a clearer vision for what your future looked like. And I think at that time, a lot of discussions, a lot of lack of clarity, frankly, about what that was. I just want to end with a positive statement saying that I think you all have delivered substantially over the course of this year. I think you're seeing on the slide that we have more work to do, but I just want to credit you with the progress over since last summer when we had a senior leadership meeting in terms of saying we need to see more progress. You all have responded, and I think we have seen that progress, and your model has made great progress. It's not our intention to disrupt that progress. It's our intention to support and build on the progress you've made. But part of the reason for this time frame is we want to leverage every opportunity for you all to be as successful as you can in the coming years. Just stop there.
So now we actually wanted to see if folks had some questions. They may have some questions while you're here. We wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to see if folks had questions to ask.
Just maybe one question, and it goes back to a few slides back in terms of how you're going to look at what the state submits at the end. Maybe it was just one more, and yeah, there you go. So if I kind of think about how these words and what you're saying, the state could perform perfectly well with respect to the targets that have been set for it under the existing waiver, and potentially with respect to things that you might set for a future waiver in terms of outcome objectives. And so I'm puzzled then by the statement, we believe that primary care transformation is central to the future of Maryland and should be included in the plan. I mean, honestly, what that strikes me as is you want transformation for transformation's sake as opposed to transformation in order to get to goals. And the reason I'm saying that is that there's a lot of work underway in Maryland that takes some time, some amount of time to actually yield results. And I think there are genuine, bandwidth issues, resource issues, and you've said you don't want to, put too much on our plates, but there is a lot on our plates right now, and I think the early indications are that we've done well. There may be some, clouds on the horizon, as you've highlighted, or Donna has highlighted, but there's also a number of things that went into place on January 1st of 2016, which have yet to bear fruit. So I just am puzzled by this kind of requirement that we then add something new to the mix without regard to whether we can achieve the outcome objectives that we're setting for the waiver. And maybe you could just comment on that.
Sure. So I would just answer briefly two things. Number one, this goes to actually the slide before this, which is the total cost of care growth. I'm not making hay of this now, but it does say that this is something we need to think more broadly than just a hospital global budget to think about what the future of Maryland looks like. So that's point number one. Point number two is that as I said, whether or not it's a legal requirement under the agreement we have signed with you, I'm interested in partnering with all of you to ensure that you be successful as you can be for your providers, for your bottom line, and for your beneficiaries as we can think about. And what I worry about, particularly not worry about, what I'm eager to think about is the 5% advanced alternative payment bonus, just to be quite blunt about it. I think it's a big carrot, and one I want to be sure that we have lined you up in every way to be able to draw down, and particularly if that comes with the kinds of transformation that we hope can be ultimately more successful at being sure that we're hitting this goal in a better fashion, in a more robust fashion, but more importantly, thinking about getting a beneficiary-centered view of the system. Ultimately, it's not transformation for transformation's sake. What we have now is a sector-specific transformation we want to move towards, and I think that's where the total cost of care becomes proxy for whole person care, what it means to care for the entire beneficiary, not just reform one sector of the system at a time. So I would say that I think those are the 2 points. Number one, total cost of care is something we have to keep an eye on. Again, I'm not overreacting to this at this point in time in 2016. But what it says to me is that we got to get you to a framework and a system where this won't worry me. And then number two, there's a big carrot on the table, and I want to make sure you have every chance to get it.
Gene from MedChi for the docs. I'm going to disagree with what Eric just said a little bit, and I'm a little concerned about a couple things you said. I think maybe we're not moving quick enough, frankly. My physicians, starting on January 1, have got to tell CMS or somebody whether they're going to be in an APM, so they apply for MACRA and they can get the 5-point bonus, or whether they're going to be in MIPS. And one of the big concerns, and we expressed in our MACRA comments, is that we've already not instituted the joint replacement program, and I believe the oncology. I didn't include that because I wasn't 100% sure, but I don't believe that was implemented in Maryland either. If certain programs aren't going to be implemented here, and we delay, we could have a situation where my physicians not only are not able to access the 5 bonus points in the APM on the MACRA side, they also have difficulty achieving the goals on MIPS. So I think one of the things that's important is that you make sure that all the programs that are developed nationally can be accessed here, number one, so the doctors aren't disadvantaged for working in a state where we're more advanced. And then secondly, we really would like to see movement forward on programs that allow the doctors to take advantage of the fact that we've done all this work and take advantage of the fact, frankly, that folks like Eric's institution have taken a lot of risk and use that to count towards not only the doctors in private practice, but as employed physicians' risk towards MIPS and MACRA. So I'm just hopeful that we can align that and figure it out as we move forward. And if we need to have special rules as the MACRA regulations and CMS digests the comments that they've received here in Maryland, we need an asterisk here because we are different, that get done so my doctors can be successful not just in MACRA but also in MIPS. It's not just the 5-point carrot, it's also the fact that you have certain scores you're going to have to hit under MIPS to get full payment. So the swing eventually, maybe not right away, is a -9, +9 roughly, the way I read it. I believe that's correct. So this is real money, and waiting is not really an option for my members.
So I appreciate the last 2 comments because it makes me look perfectly reasonable. I think that I hear that point. I am sympathetic to the prior commenter, right, which is that we are in a state that has done a lot, and there's capacity issues, and how fast can we go? What I want to be sure to do is give you every opportunity to be as successful as possible. So again, on this last slide, I just want to point out that, highlighting that, yes, we're talking about primary care transformation, but we understand that we also want to talk about post-acute care, geographic, other ways to pick up the specialists in some of those. But what I don't want to do, I just want to be clear, is to rapidly jump into other CMS programs that may not make sense for the way that the GBRI works in Maryland. What I would rather do is think about working with you all, partnering with you all to ensure that your docs have an opportunity, but in a way that makes sense for you all in the state of Maryland.
And I recognize that both the oncology program and the joint replacement program probably don't qualify as APMs. I believe that's the case. But they certainly would qualify towards point totals in their MIPS. And physicians in Maryland have been excluded because of the waiver specifically for participating in those 2 programs. So you're putting, if you don't figure out another way to make us whole, you're putting us at a disadvantage, and that's a problem. And we can't just look at primary care. We got to look at everybody, and we should make sure that at least everybody has access to the same things everyone else does. So if you say we're not going to do this for this specialty or that for that specialty, then I think CMS has an obligation to either not penalize the doctors in their specialties or to do something else for them. And secondly, I think we need to really push for clarity by the end of the year, because my doctors have an affirmative responsibility. You've told the entire nation that they've got to tell you by January 1 what they're doing. I don't think it's unreasonable for us to follow the same rules that everybody else is following in the context of what the deal is we have right now. So you've got to give us some clarity on how that's going to work and make sure that we're not uniquely disadvantaged, because frankly, with all the work that my hospital friends have done, we should be advantaged, not disadvantaged, if we make this work. So I don't want people left out, and I am a little worried when you say primary care, primary care. I think we should be saying people who provide primary care services, first of all, at a minimum, because we should really be talking about like evaluation and management and that type of thing, because does it matter if Dr. Haft as a cardiologist provides the primary care service, or does it matter if Dr. Paravembo as the anesthesiologist does in his pain clinic, or does it have to be Dr. Walsh because he happens to be trained as a primary care physician? I think that's an issue, but I also think that other specialties are an important part of this, and the macro rules apply to all physicians. The MACRA and the MIPS rules apply to all physicians. So that's the concern we have. I'm saying for the physician world, our concern is don't leave whole specialties out, which there's already been a tendency to do. And if you do that, you need to figure something out on that. And we need to get the stuff straight by January 1 so my doctors know what box to check when they're answering the question, or we could lose a lot of money.
If I can jump in on Jean's comments, and something we submitted in our comment letter on MACRA is really considering the model we've got here in Maryland as an advanced APM. And I think that the challenge we're all wrestling with is we've gone down this road to the Maryland all-payer model, and now we have a new effort, MACRA, put on the table, and we're trying to reconcile those two things. And I think Jean has just articulated nicely, we are midway through this stream, at least of the first phase of the waiver, and part of the need to hurry up now has to do with MACRA driving underneath. But to your concern, which I share that concern, we want to make certain we build something. Thinking about doing that in 6 months is daunting, and we don't want to fuss with it after that. In 2019, I worry that we're chasing this mismatch of policy recommendations, and I think our learning to date here has been to do it well and to do it right. But I too, Jean, share your concerns. My sense is it's less about primary care than it is about physicians overall, and we've got to find a way for all Maryland physicians to be able to avail themselves of the MACRA opportunity. Two questions, if I could, Dr. Cha. You talked about Maryland healthcare system must continue to rapidly evolve. I think one of the things we struggled with is there seems to be perhaps a split of expectations, rapidly being a pretty subjective term. Would you talk a little bit about your expectations, CMS's expectations around what rapidly means? And the second is this concept of a primary care transformation. Jean and I have already been, in some conversation. What does that mean to you? And can you help us a little bit as we even start to evaluate what we might be able to do in 6 months? What does that mean to you?
Sure.
Thank you.
So on rapidly, I think you're seeing on this slide what I mean by rapidly. I think it's sort of trying to think about this time frame. I think that in terms of what primary care transformation means, I think that was part of the point of outlining where CPC is, and not to say that it has to be CPC, but I think I can tell you that, and to your points about whether a non-primary care trained doc can be, I think that's absolutely part of the discussion that we're happy to have with you all. There's no, I think there's a definition of what CPC calls primary care. There's a MACRA, advanced APM definition for primary care. I think we should shoot towards that MACRA one to ensure, again, that we're lining up with that. But I didn't go through that because, quite frankly, there's a lot of room for design, a lot of room for us to think through, for you all to think through what is right for Maryland and what makes sense for your state. And I would put our position more in an advisory role to be sure that that vision that emerges does align with MACRA. I don't see CMS driving that conversation. I don't think we should. I think, as with most things in this state, You all have brilliant people here to think through what those ideas are. I think you had Howard start with some ideas about what primary care transformation. We're supportive for those conversations to continue. And I think our role here will be to continue to advise, share lessons from other states, and also ensure that what you're doing here does in fact align with what, as you pointed out, the macro incentives are. But I'm not so sure they're mismatched and misaligned as much as we just need to take some care, and that's on something that we can work with you to ensure that we are in fact making sure these braid together. I think the point of my first two slides was I actually think this is very consistent with what you all are doing in the state. Now, to Jean's point, the time frames are challenging. I'm not going to, obviously, but you know what? The entire country is facing that same challenge. And this is not something that is Maryland specific. I understand that has Maryland specific implications, but trust me, we're hearing all over the country the same sort of concern and the same anxiety about this. And again, I'm not underplaying the uniqueness of the Maryland situation. Obviously it is. But just to say, MACRA does implement things quickly. I mean, that's just sort of a factual statement around the country. And that's true for Maryland as well.
So thank you for your presentation, Ben Steffen from the Healthcare Commission. I wanted to see if you had a specific target for what you thought the percentage of Maryland physicians who should be in advanced payment models. I know that in one of the CMS presentations you talked about nationally from 5 to 12% of physicians would be in advanced payment models. Given the limitations that Maryland can't currently participate, Maryland physicians don't participate. The oncology model is a APM. Don't think the hip orthopedic model is. But given the limitations, do you have any targets in mind? And then secondly, on CPC Plus, as I'm sure you know, there's both in year 1 and year 2, there wasn't an overall ROI on the program. Definitely in the NPRM, it's clear that there's a PCMH bump, if you will, that if you're in a PCMH program, it sort of moves you closer to an advanced payment model. But, and I have been heavily engaged in working with payers, and the Commission has with our colleagues in state government as well as the private payers in some practices in getting an application together. But I do worry if we see, and we are accepted in a CPC Plus program, that we could see quality improvements, but maybe not the savings that under the first 2 years of the so-called classic program, we don't see savings, but we see quality. Would that be good enough? So the two questions are what percentage and what's good enough under CPC Plus to keep us moving down the road?
Sure. On the first question, I don't have a direct answer. I mean, I don't have a magic number for what we can do. What I can tell you is that I'd like to work with you to maximize that number. And I think that there's every reason to think you have particular unique levers to really hit that way in a way that others can't. And the second question, I think two things. Number one, with regard to CPC Classic, as we sometimes call it, no, we didn't hit the savings, the ROI numbers, but it's not over, right? And I think more data to come. We think that it's very clear that there's an initial startup investment, which most of our PCMH experience has shown you hopefully start to recoup in later years. So I think it's way too early to say we didn't save money off that. And then the third point is that to your question of what's good enough, I think it depends on how we want to build that, how we want to incent that, and what you all are willing to pay for.
Yeah, just one additional thought is that, yes, the CPC Classic program, I guess we will know the results on that, but we'll be judged on CPC Plus in the context of the overall model performance, not on how the state does on CPC Plus. I think that's a consideration. So we'll probably be 2 to 3 years into CPC Plus, but then the assessment on the total, the broader model will be coming into clear view, and they probably need to be some thought on alignment.
Okay, I'm going to recognize Stan, see if our friend Bruce on the phone has any thoughts, and then Dr. Cha, you tell us when we're bumping up against your time constraint, because I don't want to
take up your time.
No, well, no, we love having you respond to these questions, but you tell us when you have to move on. So Stan, next.
Ian Join from the Urban Institute, working with the Maryland. Thank you. Stan Join from the Urban Institute, working with the Maryland Citizens Health Initiative. And a couple things. One is I wanted to commend your emphasis on the focus on beneficiaries. And I think the importance of improving the primary care infrastructure in Maryland is central via practice transformation, but also via just strengthening the infrastructure in areas of the state where it's very, very weak. I think it's terrific that we've made great progress on hospital-acquired conditions and rehospitalizations. But if you look at our PQI indicators, there are a lot of ambulatory care sensitive conditions where our admission rate is well above the national average, which is unfortunate for a state that has income also above the national average. And so I think your focus on what can we do to improve the kind of care that people get outside the hospital is absolutely on the money. So that's one comment. A question involves the time frame for moving forward. And my question is whether you think there's room for us to be experimental and differentiated. And let me explain what I mean. It is, as you said, it's an ambitious timeline. And it may be that by the end of the year, we'll have some specific models that we want to test. I mean, my hope would be that instead of committing to jumping in with both feet statewide, we could do what some states in other contexts have done, which is to say, let's come up with some promising approaches. Let's test them in part of the state. Let's see how they do, and let's modify them as we scale up. Is there room for that sort of approach? And also, is there room for a differentiated sort of approach? There are some very high-cost users where a pretty aggressive intervention could yield a positive return on investment, and yet if you did that same sort of intervention with other patients, you would not get a positive return on investment. Patients would be better off, but financially, the system as a whole wouldn't be better off. So, my thought, I know that Donna and her colleagues have been focused on ideas of let's do one level of intervention for the absolute highest cost users, take another perspective on rising utilizers. What can we do to intervene to prevent those costs from increases? So I guess my question is, when you think about the primary care transformation that we want to do in Maryland, is there room for experimentation and is there room for differentiation? I assume you're not going to say we have to jump in with both feet by the end of 2016 with a defined vision that doesn't distinguish between consumers.
So to the experimental question, I mean, I'm from the Innovation Center. Everything we do is a demonstration. And so in terms of how we would implement this with you, it would be a test, and we would set up parameters for that test. We would set up options and channels for that test to the degree you wanted to, and there'd be expected returns on that test and different options for whether you're successful or not successful on the test. Just as with your Maryland model overall, which is a test, right? Which you're hitting all your marks, and so I have every expectation you to be successful on your core Maryland model, but this additional component, everything's a test with us.
Right, but is there room for a sub-state test?
So are you asking whether we can do different things in different areas of the state?
That, and also, even if we think there's an approach that might work all throughout the state, can we start in one part of the state, see how it works?
As I said, I have I bring no bias that it's a one-size-fits-all for Maryland in terms of thinking through. I think the reality, and this points to the success of various models that already exist, is that there's probably going to have to be a couple of different options and a framework under which they all live together. That's my expectation. But again, I'm already saying more than I wanted to because I really want this to be something that you all are thinking through how the system works together. I do think there has to be a common framework of the metrics, how the money flows, and what the core functions have to be, how we execute on that. I'd be thrilled to have a robust conversation with all your partners about what that might look like and what the various options might be within that. So I think that's very appropriate and very much what I'm anticipating, at least for the discussion. On your second question of differentiated, I would just say that some of our most successful models incorporate exactly that kind of targeting. There can't be this idea of a $5 PMPM and the same services for everyone. You're going to lose your shirt. You're just, might as well just increase primary care payment rates if you want to do that, which, by the way, is perfectly reasonable. But if you're really thinking about this, I think now having said that, how you fund this versus what you do can be different questions. We see states, for instance, that do a $5 PMPM for everyone in the state, in the Medicaid program, and then allow entities to target those funds to address the needs of certain beneficiaries, high-need beneficiaries. So while the funding may be the same, there's a differential and I would say a needs-driven approach towards the delivery. Others are actually tiering the payments to the actual needs and trying to think about risk adjusting the payment that way. I think it depends what your unit of analysis is here, how you want to make the payments flow, but I would say that there is no model that's successfully executing that isn't thinking about differentiation. I point to Vermont here. I think Vermont has an interesting model where there is a community-based care team of intensive community-based services, and they go out and really identify these high utilizers and try and address their needs. There's a subcomponent of that that's really about the needs of homebound and particularly LTSS type services. But so there's a community-based high needs program. There's a piece that's how do we help primary care practices be better primary care practices, whether it's a care coordinator, whether it's infrastructure support, there's a piece there. And then I think this is a piece that often gets forgotten, and I just want to put it on the table for discussion, which is there's sort of, in some states, what we call an accountable health community type entity that could be under this umbrella as well, which is really regionally how are we thinking about ensuring that those PCMHs can be as successful as they can, particularly with the interface with social services for high needs beneficiaries. So it's not just the high intensity community care needs team, but it's thinking, oh, well, we might need to do a better job of aligning this policy to that policy at a regional level. Having said that, that's Vermont. That doesn't have to be Maryland. But just to say to your point, if you all want to, if this is something that you want to engage in, there's a variety of lessons around the country to build off of, and we'd be eager to have that conversation. You may not want to, and we're happy to have that conversation as well, but just to say, what we want to see is a transformation network that's pulling in a beneficiary-centered world that's really delivering a beneficiary-centered set of services. How you want to do that, I think that's very much lots of degrees of freedom there, and happy to pull in more lessons from around the country to the degree helpful.
Okay, thank you. Bruce, it's Jack. You haven't had a chance to jump in. If you'd like to, this is fine, or you, of course, can jump in later.
Okay. Here, I'll jump in when I...
okay. Flag me when you're ready. That's great. Thanks. Any other comments? Yes, Bob.
I'm Bob Krunzik, University of Maryland Medical System, one of the big systems in the state, and we're very supportive of the waiver here and what we've been able to accomplish, and grateful to CMS for getting the next phase of this waiver going. Curious to see, and given everything you're doing, this may be nowhere near a priority for you, but as we come up on the next phase of the waiver, moving towards total cost of care and get ready to submit our plan, what degree of specificity or, is CMMI looking for in terms of how we progress to that next phase? And we heard about primary care, hear that loud and clear, but other things you may be looking for and the timing of the step into total cost of care. If you guys are thinking through that, be curious to hear, where your heads are.
I think I would float back to what I think I said earlier, but just to say, I think the primary care transformation is something we're hoping to actually program for this year, if possible. And again, we have options to think about what the time frame looks like. In terms of what the total cost of care vision that we're hoping for by the close of this year, I would say, again, enough of a vision that we don't have to take apart what we're building both in the gain sharing amendment and the primary care transformation, enough of a vision that we can say, here's how these pieces fit together, and in terms of thinking through what that accountability would look like. I would hope that it would have some framework of a vision for a beneficiary-centered, how we think about costs for all Maryland beneficiaries and quality, but it doesn't have to be, in terms of level of specificity, I think that's as far as we can get. As far as you can get is, I think, understanding how this all fits together is, I think, the key question. And again, setting aside the requirements of the agreement, it's more from a framework of, I just want to be sure that we continue on progress. We don't take one step forward, two steps back, one forward, two steps back. And I think if we can do that together, I think we can hit the parameters of the agreement.
Thank you.
One more, Jack. Sure. I'm wondering, Dr. Chaw, especially with some very potentially aggressive timeframes, would you or someone else be available to us? I'm sensing the tension as we start to think about some of these things. I hear you saying you want to be flexible and we have some room to innovate. On the other hand, on a very short time frame, we probably don't have a lot of time to go back and forth. So if there are some basic structures, framework, rules of the road, it might be helpful. And my guess is we may have to split into to groups to get some of this done. It might be very helpful. Would that be something that you or others at CMS could help us with? I just hate for us to go down a road for 3 or 4 months and find out we've really missed something important.
Sure. So, I think 2 things. Number one, we're happy to have conversations. I mean, I think that, as I said, we talk about Maryland a lot, and I think the next frame for Maryland is important, not just because you're an important state, but because we're excited about this model. We're excited about the next steps for your model. We think there's a way for you to continue to be a national leader in terms of innovating on what state-based reform can be. So we're there, we're invested, we're with you, right? And so to the degree that conversation can be helpful, we're happy to have those conversations. I will also say, just the only caveat on that is, I was at Medicaid for about 5 or 6 years before this job. The best way to get a proposal to tank is to say, CMS thinks we should, ... So I am cognizant of our role in that, and I do think it's important that the vision be your own, because frankly, you're the ones that do have to do the work. So, it's a little unfair for me to say, I want you to hit an aggressive time frame, and I'm not going to tell you what to do. But that's kind of what I'm saying, and I'm saying that for the future success of you, if this is something that CMS tells you to do, this is not going to have enduring success. And you all and the stakeholder buy-in has been such a hallmark of this process to date. And I think HSCRC has been wonderful in trying to mediate some of those conversations along with the Secretary. So we want to build on that successful model that you have built on. But of course, we're always happy to engage and have conversations.
Okay. Just a quick question. Thank you, Dr. Shaw. This has been very informative, and it's consistent with the discussions that we've had with our executive director as well. I represent Peninsula Regional Health System, which is the 8th largest health system in Maryland. We represent the Eastern Shore, particularly the Lower Shore, and a large retirement community of significant area, representing 6 counties, including 2 out-of-state, Virginia and Sussex and Delaware. Saying that, what we've also done as an entity is developed an affordable care organization, and under that ACO model, there's at least 25 to 28 now in Maryland that have been approved, which was what I was recently told. And so in your presentation, you made it very clear about flexibility, and I would support that in terms of our need to be flexible, because hospitals are funding these entities, and we're investing in infrastructure. We're deploying 10 case managers as I speak in terms of going into our primary care practices. And there's a lot of activity and infrastructure being built today. And I think perhaps from Eric's comments from MedStar that this is what we're talking about. January of 2016, we were just recently approved, many of us. And so we're getting some synergy, but it's a slow walk. And so as flexible as you can be in allowing us to continue under the MACRA or the MIPS program, the QBP program, we need to have that flexibility, because we don't want that to be a sunk cost. We want to return and work with our primary care physicians. So thank you.
Just 2 things real quick. Number one, I don't know about how that works with us now, but would love to hear more in terms of how the finances interact. I think 2 points to make. Number one, I just want to be very clear that in the quality payment program and MACRA, that statute rulemaking, there's particularly in the early years going to be some challenges with how we have, carte blanche flexibility over those. But having said that, I think there's a lot of parameters within the existing NPRM to think about how we can address the needs and make this, ensure that what we're doing with you aligns with the rules coming out of MACRA. So.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Cha. This has been great. I sense the group has been eager to have this kind of session for a few months now, and you've been most responsive to the questions and very informative. I've learned a lot. you're, of course, welcome to stay and join in if you can, but if you also have to scoot, we understand that too. But thank you. It was a really good contribution today. I think the next step is for me to turn to my HMA colleague, Deborah Gracie. Deborah has been deeply involved in the work of the all-payer model for at least a year and a half now, and is really a leader of HMA's assistance to the state of Maryland on many levels, and has taken particular interest recently in developing the key components or proposal for the key components of a progression plan that would be laid out for the state by the end of the year. And so she's going to walk us through the work to date, and we welcome comments on that progression plan, the key elements, what you might think are missing, how it can be improved. So that will lead to a facilitated discussion. But Deb, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you for the opportunity to meet with you today. Dr. Cha and Donna have done a great job of setting up this discussion. You all received a copy of the all-payer model progression plan. We're going to actually work from the document itself. We're not going to work from slides today. The objective is for us to, together, step through the components of what could be a blueprint for a strategy that we submit to CMS by the end of this year in order to meet the requirements that Dr. Cha quoted at the beginning of his presentation. The idea of this particular blueprint is that we get your input around, do we have the right components? Is it addressing all the right components? Are we thinking about our approach to the progression plan itself appropriately? And do we need to get, some feedback and think about massaging that some? And to really ask ourselves the next steps to really put some meat on this to whatever level of detail that we decide is appropriate as we work together. As all of the questions that you asked and all the conversations that we just had with Howard and Donna and Dr. Shaw are really what this is all about. I'm not sure if you all had the chance to read it ahead of time, so what I want to do is I just want to step through each section with you, have a little bit of dialogue, make sure we have clear understanding about what's in it. And then you will recognize that you can give us input today, but there's a lot of input that we'll need in the future, right? So this will set you up to be able to sit down with this and really think about the comments and the ideas that you would like to submit for the purpose of the creation of the blueprint. So any questions about basically what we're headed into right here? We good? Okay. All right. So we start off with the background. One of the things when we started working on this strategy for the next phase of the all-payer model, Donna reminded us that we should go back and look at where we started with the all-payer model back in 2014. So we looked at that. We looked at the original application, and interestingly enough, a lot of the things we're talking about today, like care coordination and a little bit of standardization and patient-centeredness. It was all laid out in the original application. So what we've done here on the first couple pages is we've reminded everybody of the model goals that were set out in 2014. That's what's on page 2. These colorful blocks, these are from the original application. So this is not new stuff. This is what was submitted in 2013 for the model that you started in 2014. And then the all-payer model driver diagram, which is on page 3. So I'd like to just spend a minute with that diagram and, just to remind ourselves of what we said back in the day and how we'll want to think about this for the future. So as I said, some of the drivers that we identified back in 2013 were, whole person care management, effective transitions, data-driven population care management, patient engagement, integration with patient-centered medical homes, care coordination, development of a statewide HIE. So all of this was laid out as what we were going to do in order to get to our aim, which was over a 5-year period would achieve the goals of better care, better health, and lower costs. So part of the exercise, we're going to go, let me finish this one, and then I want to address whatever you want to. So part of the exercise that we're going to go through is we're going to take this driver diagram, the original one, and we're going to update it with this group. It's not updated yet. There's a placeholder for it at the end of this strategy, where we're going to say, what about this driver diagram do we want to update as we move forward? But I think the important thing is the continuation of what we started. This is really not, we're not in foreign territory. This was our plan to begin with.
Just a point of clarification, I assume what we meant here under aim number 1 was reduce the rate of increase in total Medicare per capita spending.
That is certainly where we ended up. This is an exact replica of what was in our application. So we did struggle with that, the wording throughout the process, but it's definitely to reduce the rate of increase.
So as we look at the future driver diagram, which we believe, and you know, we're looking for feedback, we think we should do an updated driver diagram for the next 5 years of the model, or whatever time frame we end up putting on the next phase of the model, and say to ourselves, how do we take what we started and enhance it to meet where we're headed next with this progression and the rapid evolution? Any feedback on that at this time? Any questions or concerns? Okay. The next section is where we start to lay out the results of the current all-payer model. Again, both Donna and Dr. Shaw talked about this in their comments, but part of the driving force of moving through this progression is that we have had tremendous success and we want to continue that success. But we also see that the level of success is starting to plateau a little bit. And there might be a lot of different reasons for that. But it appears that part of that has to do with needing more alignment with the rest of the system. Donna, I want to let you speak to whichever one of these metrics you would like to call out at this time.
Yeah, I don't know if I necessarily wanted to dive into the metrics per se, other than just really to set the stage that you know, as we're moving into the model, you know, what are we learning from the model, and you know, we're having very you know, we've had good success in terms of the all-payer per capita growth, and in the Medicare growth rates that we're trying to beat under the model to create the savings. The Medicare growth rates have been the smallest growth in you know, decades. So we're trying to drive a model forward with a very tight, low growth rates in Medicare. And so what we've been able to do is to implement this model and to be in line with the requirements for the Medicare growth rates without cost shifting to the private side. So that's a very good accomplishment, to be able to control the total cost of care, and also to meet the Medicare growth rate requirements without cost shifting onto the private side, which happens in other parts of the country. and I think what we're seeing now, though, is some growth in non-hospital costs, and we need to really focus on how we're going to focus on the total cost of care. Nobody brought up the good question to Dr. Cha about data, but we really need to have, as our providers implement the, he's going to leave the room now. He's already been asked that question more times than he doesn't need to be asked again. But the providers need to really, as they're implementing, have the view into how what they're doing is impacting the total cost of care, and also to make sure that the utilization reductions are happening fast enough in the hospital side to offset the non-hospital increases. And so I think really just some of those dynamics are really what we hope to bring in view as we're looking at these results and thinking about how we want to move things forward to make sure that we have a line of sight into what we're doing and accelerate the involvement of our community-based partners and our hospital-based partners in the process of implementing, and I think that's really a major point of those early results of really needing that line of sight and the involvement outside of the hospital system.
Is it possible for us to ascertain the total cost of care trend for all payers, like we do on the aggregate spending in the hospital per se, or is that not doable?
We have collected information for Medicaid, and so we have information collected for Medicaid. We have information collected for the insured portion of the commercial population, and so we have actually aggregated that information, and but we are still working our way through getting the self-insured portion aggregated, and so that we're not complete with that effort. And MHCC is involved in that process as well. But so there are some statistics there. The collection of commercial insurance data is not as rapid as the CMS reports that we get. So they're usually about a year behind on the information flow. The data is being collected quarterly now, though, and so there is the potential to accelerate that process into the future. I think the commission staff have put a lot of emphasis in the current time frame on the Medicare information and trying to get that out to the hospitals, and we are also working with our contractors to collect the other information and process it, but we're not done yet.
I just had a quick question for either Dr. Cha or Donna, anybody else, and that has to do with the boundaries or the definition of the total cost of care. If it really means the total cost of care, now I'm taking off my hat as a facilitator here and trying to remember that I'm a health economist, it includes a lot of explosive high-cost things that are largely beyond the control of any state, like the approval of new advanced medical technology in areas like specialty pharmacy, biotech, medical devices. So decisions made every day at places like the Food and Drug Administration and even CMS on the approval of technology for public programs. Is that all? Is it an inclusive definition of total cost of care? And is that something we should be concerned about? Because we can certainly bring in physicians. It's a very hard thing. We've talked about that all day and post-acute. But there are a lot of other items in the healthcare space that are pretty hard for any state to control. Any thoughts?
But yes, our test is comparative, so the people in Maryland are like the people everywhere else in the country, and they're using the same technology, and so we're hopeful that as we build a comparative metric on the Medicare side, that we'll take that into account. And when we built the metric on the commercial side, on the all-payer side, we put an exception clause in our agreement, which we would expect to continue as we negotiate our hospital continuation, that we'll want a continuation of an exception clause if something happens that is, way out of bounds, that we have an opportunity to amend our goals. So I think that's really an exception clause that we would want to continue. So,
thanks.
Ben?
Yes, so I think there's another ask for Dr. Chop that, as some of you know, the Supreme Court in February of 2016 ruled on the ability of state APCDs to collect self-insured data quite, I think, unexpectedly. They ruled that states couldn't require self-insured ERISA-exempt organizations to submit. That a solution is being worked through slowly, but it's thought that the Department of Labor, which has some oversight on ERISA-exempt self-insured organizations, is going to have to play an important role for a quick solution. So to the extent that CMS can work with Department of Labor, I think that would all be very helpful. I think certainly it does have the prospects of leading to some greater data collection efficiency if we can come up with a solution.
Carmela?
This may be more a comment. As I look at the charts on page 4, and I think you said some of these things were plateauing. Maybe one of the important discussions that I don't know that we've ever had, but maybe it begins to bring these expectations back, is the discussion of what is possible. And it sort of goes to your point, Jack, that you just raised. What are those bounds around total cost of care? How much can we control in Maryland versus the rest of the United States in those comparisons? But there may be some of these metrics where we shouldn't expect a continued geometric progression of what we've seen in year 1 or year 2. But that might be a helpful discussion for us all at some point.
I don't actually agree that we're plateauing. I think we're barely started going, because I'm a believer that we have 20 plus, more than 20% of utilization that can get out of the hospital system. We haven't had Medicare Advantage here in the state, and if we can't get 20% more out of the hospital utilization, I'll be surprised. So I think we're just started, and I think the efforts need to be, we need to pick the right efforts to make sure that we accelerate the process, and that's what I'm really hopeful that we can do is, and I hear, Eric saying, hey, I just started on January 1 with 40,000 ACO members. I'm accelerating now, and you're going to see it next year. But breathe hard, breathe hard, breathe hard. You got to give me and Peggy's saying the same thing. Hey, I'm starting to accelerate right now. We are Maryland. We should be able to accelerate with our ACOs. Let's take stock of that, because we really. So I'm interested in hearing how we can get our efforts accelerated now.
And I just think at some point a discussion as part of this. What is our common view of where we think these metrics can be pushed to?
Yeah, so we actually had a little bit of a conversation about that this morning. So I think that's one of the things we need to focus on, of where do we think the metrics can land. If we are successful, what would it look like, and start building that picture on the hospital metrics. But I think that's really important.
Okay, let's continue then. Thank you, Dr. Cha. In the next section, we simply acknowledge the fact that all of the work we're doing in Maryland is in the context of a very large national push towards transformation, and it just, like I say, acknowledges that, and then also acknowledges the fact that there are also SIM projects going on in Maryland, and aligning all of the efforts. As you guys have identified, there are many, many things going on, will be important to think about and consider as we're developing the strategy. In section 2, where we've laid out a vision statement, this is a summary of what the advisory council and other stakeholders have told us the vision should look like. It's not finalized and approved, so to speak, but it is a reflection of the discussions that we've had with the stakeholders in Maryland. So that will need to be looked at.
Can I make one suggestion on that?
Sure.
Is rather than engage and empower patients to participate in decisions about their treatment, to expand it to say about their health.
Okay.
Maybe even consumers rather than patients. Thinking of you.
Okay.
That would be better. Thank you.
Anything else? Okay. In section 3, we describe the fact that we are working, Maryland is working on the care redesign amendment to the all-payer model, which Dr. Cha also talked about. It's the care redesign amendment, which you guys are aware of, has the 2 different care redesign programs under it, the hospital-based one and the community-based one, and basically describes what its intention is and what we expect the timeline on it to be. When we get to
just kind of a little brief advertisement, we do have a session at MHA next Friday to go over the care redesign amendment to get into more details, because it's been an ongoing process for some time, and so it's getting to a place where we're thinking it's in the near future will be coming out of the chute, so to speak. So I think we're ready to do some more education, re-education, and refinements. As you know, and as we've discussed before, the programs, the care redesign programs under the amendment are flexible. And right now, the 2 programs that I mentioned are what we have. But recognizing that those can change, additional programs can be added. The whole thing has been written to be extremely flexible and to be able to respond to what Maryland needs as we identify it. It could be expanded to other provider types. Along with all of that, in D on page 6 is, a responsibility to take on significant administrative functions while CMS retains, the monitoring and oversight. So part of what we're going to need to think about for our strategy and our strategic plan is how are we going to build the infrastructure in Maryland in order to facilitate, administer, oversee these programs as they continue to roll. How are we going to help with the pilots if there's administration that is needed to measure pilots and then do broad-based implementation. There's a lot to this kind of work, and part of our plan will need to include thoughts about how we want to organize around that. Okay, in section 4, the purpose of the model progression plan. Again, what we did on this is we took all of the stakeholder, everything that we've heard from you, everything that we've heard from other work groups and in other meetings, and we tried to consolidate it into purpose statements about exactly what it is we're trying to accomplish with the progression plan. I don't necessarily want to read you all of these things.
But the general idea, as Donna described, is we're going to lay out a plan for the transformation over time. That is how we intend to meet the requirement for the December 31st date that we have to meet with CMS for this progression that was described earlier. It will talk about transformation, and it will lay out, I mean, this is the idea and that we need to get the feedback on. It will lay out the potential models that we might pursue over the next 5 years, not in great detail necessarily, but it will have a time frame that says by this date we're going to consider certain models of certain types, and that would be the commitment that we make. The models earlier in the time frame would need to have more detail. The models later in the time frame would most likely have less detail. This is how we're thinking about it right now and what we need your feedback about. There would be, the purpose of this would be to set up this phased approach that over time gives more responsibility for the care and the financial responsibility to all types of providers, all to be determined, right? But generally speaking, ever increasing accountability for the clinical care as well as the financial accountability over a long period of time, and just lay out thoughts and, you know, possibilities for what that could look like. We would outline, yes,
Asking questions at the end, or are we asking them?
No, I'd like to just dialogue.
So how does this fit in with our concern, the physician concern about MACRA and MIPS? So obviously we like that there be more models, that's great, but I'm assuming this is independent of us coming up with an immediate plan that's going to be resolved by January 1, so we can check the box?
For the primary care, so for
all doctors, MACRA applies to all physicians.
Right. Yeah, and it's exactly, I say primary care the way you said it earlier.
Not the same
which
thing.
is the delivery of those services, right? So.
But no, all physicians. MACRA applies to all physicians.
Yeah. No, right. Okay. So so right now we're continuing to work on getting the amendment to apply, right? So that's in the.
That would be great.
Right.
I think it needs to be an ongoing discussion of how we're going to, what are the opportunities to move to get MACRA in play in Maryland? How do we want to do that? What are the best avenues to do that? What's the timeline to do that? That discussion needs to start and continue. I mean, it has started, but it needs to be, you know, what do folks want to accomplish? And if we're going to set out into a direction, you know, what is that direction and what's the timeline of that direction? And we certainly are focused on, and as you know, Jean and Carmela, we started talking about MACRA and MIPS when we started talking to CMS about the amendment. So we're still focused on trying to see how that could work with MACRA and MIPS. Still, even if we have the amendment approved, we have to have programs to go along with the amendment that will create the interplay between the docs and the hospitals and the all-payer model. We actually need that interplay for everything to work together. So, you know, I think then the question becomes, you know, can we work out the details there, and then how do we create an interplay that works? And so it's a conversation that needs to take place. So in terms of you know, where we are relative to the rest of the country, because we have the all-payer model, potentially we're actually ahead of most of the country. Because pretty much all they have are ACOs and the oncology model, are pretty much what seems to, and the primary care model. So those are the things.
There are a handful of other models that get you points in MIPS as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like the joint replacement, which is not an APM, but clearly gets you points towards your MIPS total.
Mm-hmm.
So my point, though, is that this is all good. I have no problem with this. I like the idea of a time frame and working on additional models, but it seems to me our higher priority, and it should be mentioned here in some way, is that we are going to do X, Y, and Z to begin the alignment process by, taking advantage of the fact that every physician in the United States, as of right now, unless there's some magic change that occurs, and I don't think there's going to be one, I'd love for there to be one, but I don't think it's going to happen, it's going to have to make a decision on January 1 of whether they're going to do MAC or MIPS. So I just, my fear is that we focus so much on the blueprint and the plan and where we're going that we don't deal with the practical problem. And then when the docs are sitting there on January 1, they're not able to, for whatever reason, to even do MACRA because it doesn't work and there's nothing available in Maryland, or they do MIPS but they're disadvantaged from other states. So I just think it needs to be recognized, talked about, figured out, and we should have a very focused plan on dealing with it. I think I explained that to him as well when he was here, but that's all. This is all fine. I'm not upset about this. I just think that should be the high priority from our perspective.
I mean, I hear what you're saying. We kind of have it built in everywhere. It's like make sure we're looking at macro alignment, but what you're saying is, what I'm hearing you saying, Gene, is we need a plan like right now that is completed by the end of the year to think about what the strategy is for macro, which, yes, we should do this progression plan, but that's a longer-term plan, and we need a shorter-term plan.
Well, the way the rule is currently written, if the physician doesn't pick that they're going to do MACRA and be able to present it to CMS on January 1, their next opportunity would be the following year, and then they would be begin to be advantaged or disadvantaged in 2020. So, I mean, we still need to do an ongoing basis, but we got a kind of sword hanging over our head here with January 1, so we've got to take that into consideration.
So what you're saying is we need to create an active planning process. It's part of this, but it's a separate activity really of clarifying what will or will not happen in front of January 1 and how that will position or not position doctors for 2019 or 2020.
And I think you get that. I mean, I'm not saying you don't. I'm just getting nervous because isn't July 1 tomorrow? I think.
Yeah.
And my dates get confused.
So
we're talking about 6 months, right?
Yeah.
That's not a long time to figure this out.
And you want credit in the bank
Yeah.
for what has been done to date under the joint replacement and oncology.
Well, I don't know if we want credit. Frankly, we're not that. My point is, particularly bringing it to him, was we've already been disadvantaged. The physician community has been disadvantaged because of this. Maybe it's minor disadvantagement. If that continues, if that pattern continues, and we keep saying certain programs aren't going to be implemented here, then you could have whole specialties. And I'm frankly really surprised the orthopods aren't in here screaming and yelling. If I represented them specifically, I probably would be, because you have a whole specialty that can't argue that, they don't even have a shot. They don't even have anything to participate in, or they're uniquely disadvantaged as they try to hit their MIPS totals, so they don't lose the money. Because MIPS is a plus-minus swing, and that starts too. So, I mean, my concern is that we could be putting ourselves in a bad position down the road. I don't know that I necessarily worry about credit. What I'd really like credit for is all the rest that my friends around the table have already taken, like Bob and Eric and all these folks who have hospitals are taking risk already. And since that's what MACRA is measuring, they should get credit for that. Because particularly if you're a physician who's employed by Maryland or MedStar, for example, you're taking all kinds of risk. If things don't work out with this system, you might lose your job. That's risk. And they should get credit for that, and that should count towards the MACRA payments, at least on their billings. And can we figure out how to do that for the private docs who work in coordination with them as well? And I think that's kind of what you're asking for with the amendment, and I understand, and that's what we really would like. I don't know if that's realistic or not, but my point is we need a real plan that makes sense by January 1, and because they have to make real decisions by January 1.
And if I can jump in, Christine, I think that what you're saying, there are at least three distinct tasks, and I think one of the questions, some may belong around this table and some may not. One is MACRA, and whatever happens with the Maryland model, MACRA is happening, and we've got to figure that out for Maryland. The second, I think, is the challenge Dr. Chaw has just put on the table, which is, can you do a primary care something by the end of the year? And the third is this progression plan. It'd be nice if those things align, but the MACRA piece goes on regardless of what happens in Maryland, and we probably need to the planning process, that may be three separate separate activities, and some maybe not even around this table.
So we probably need to have some work going on outside of the room here that would come back on that front.
Without trying to get into tactics and everything, I thought Dr. Cha opened the door when he said, don't spend a lot of time building something for a year and then you're going to take it apart when you get to the next year. But they're going to have to give something if they want us to be on a time frame that's looking at 2018 and getting it right as opposed to right now. And that seems to me to be a place we might be able to find some common ground. I don't know how much real flexibility they have, but I would mention they've got some.
In terms of
in terms of basically getting some slack into this into this standard for physicians, that getting it right so that it fits into our phase 2 may disadvantage people in the short run, and is there not a solution to that so that we stay on track to win the big game as opposed to meet this short term? And that would seem to me at least something to explore and decide, take it off the table. It isn't possible; it's a non-starter, but it would fix a lot of these issues. It seems to me.
Yeah, I think that the Maryland all-payer model is one of the few models that actually takes risk in the country, and we do have some ACOs in the state that are on the risk track, and most of them are not, but I think it bears working on that. I think Bruce Fladdock said in one of the meetings that we should be negotiating on that front. But we need to make sure that as we tie physicians to the all-payer model, that we do it in a way that is creating a constructive interface with parts of the system. So the constructive interface with the hospitals and the nursing homes, for example, on the interface between hospitals and nursing homes on joint replacement or on other things that we're focused on. So we have to make sure that happens quickly, but also thoughtfully. Just in setting that timeline in place. And
I just want to point out that Eric had a comment.
Okay.
But sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry.
I didn't want to interrupt Donna, certainly. Donna's the last person I would want to interrupt.
I thought you were done.
I mean, I do think the conversation needs to be taken outside of the room and worked on a lot to be brought back into the room.
I just wanted to say, I think that, what Gene talks about in the interests of his members with MACRA and MIPS, I mean, certainly we have that same issue with our roughly 1,800 employed physicians at MedStar. And so, certainly we're aligned on needing to have a fix and making sure that we're not somehow disadvantaged in Maryland with respect to those physicians. By the same token, I think the idea of separating the issues is a good one for multiple reasons. One of which is I don't think MACRA and MIPS should, it shouldn't be the tail wagging the waiver dog, if you will. The waiver is its issue. It's significantly important. It's complicated enough as it is, and to further complicate it by throwing MACRA and MIPS into the mix, I think could be a detriment. But I think there's also a timing issue, which Gene has articulated well, which is the docs in Maryland have to make an election by the end of this calendar year, and I can't imagine that CMS is going to have acted upon whatever it is that we submit late this year in time to give them certainty in terms of the election that they're going to have to make. And so, Donna, I heard you talking as well about, kind of parallel paths, if you will, because there's multiple ways in which one could solve a MACRA and MIPS issue, one of which is a legislative or a regulatory fix that would give Maryland physicians kind of the pass on it for the reasons that Gene has articulated.
We've asked for that,
right?
But I don't think it's realistic.
It may not be realistic, but there's, whether it's regulatory or it's legislative. I mean, just think about the clout that our legislative delegation has in Washington, and I suspect one could make the case that your members, our physicians, are being held to advantage because of some good work that we're doing in the state. So I like the idea of the separate pass. That was really the punchline. And again, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
So, I mean, I think I understand Gene's concern about having op models available January 1, but I think frankly there's not going to be many more models that are federally available. We'll have to wait to see how the amendment goes forward. But I think we should think about, is there a way we can use the PTAC, that is the Special Advisory Committee, could states such as Maryland that are advanced, could they get access to the PTAC in a way that models could be approved? Or I think the PTAC recommends rather than approves, although I'm not absolutely clear how that works. But so there may not be a model rolled out on January 1, but we have 2 or 3 models that would be available for January 1, 2018. So we're going to want to produce more models. I think where physicians groups are, specialty, primary care, or otherwise, will need to be in the model development arena for some time to come. And a smooth pathway to do that, I think, is something we ought to also be thinking about.
Yeah, and as we go through these models, it's like, Gene, the idea of the broadness of the doctors that MACRA applied, in the amendment and in the gain shares, that applies to a lot of doctors, specialists, internists, geriatricians, nurse practitioners, those things. It applies to a broad set of doctors. The CPC Plus doesn't. And as we're thinking about the models and the way we build the models and their applicability to things like MACRA, we are going to have to work with CMS. And one of the ideas that we have listed here under the purpose is to make sure that we take full advantage of what Steve said here and work with them and make sure that as we're designing this stuff that we're leveraging all the different points for the broadest set of patients and the broadest set of doctors that we can do it for. Taking care of the doctors and taking care of the patients at the same time, right? Making sure that we're using these financial mechanisms. Like I said, like in the amendment, it's broad because it's based on the CCM right now, even though that might change. But there's a lot of doctors in there, types of doctors.
Right, but it applies to everybody. So, and again,
Exactly.
my point, the one thing one of the other things they did that wasn't smart, normally when they institute new things on us, they don't do it right near the opt-out period for physicians. One of the concerns I have, and I've had physicians express this concern to me, for some doctors, they can simply say, I'm near retirement, or I can go do concierge, screw it, I'll opt out of Medicare. And it's very difficult to opt back in. You have to wait till the year runs. So I'm really concerned you could end up, because particularly if we make it more complex or they feel like there's less options, and in Maryland, because in certain areas, particularly there are shortages, they can get away with it in certain specialties, particularly if you end up with a situation where an entire specialty is not able to participate. You could see them all just saying, fine, then don't worry about it, and then we'll have access issues for patients.
Right.
I just think this is something we need to be careful and think about. Until in Maryland they raised the Medicaid rates, one of the main things Medicaid did was figure out for certain specialties, how patients could get that specialty in Medicaid. It was a major problem. We've had instances where certain programs have had difficulty, getting access to certain specialties. And if we do this wrong, I could see that happening here. And it could be a real problem for patients, particularly, I suspect, in the rural areas. And then, frankly, it'll just put more burdens on the hospitals who will end up having to subsidize it, and then we'll be providing care in more expensive places. So getting this right is worth the time. I'm fine with doing it separately in a quick, smaller group and just getting it done. I'm fine with doing it however we need to do it to get it done, so long as we have a plan that makes sense. But again, we can't just say primary care because this applies to everybody, and it could be a big, expensive mistake if we accidentally leave out a specialty.
Yeah. Okay. Any other discussion on that section? The last point in this section on the purpose of the plan is to make sure that we use a broad set of representatives to develop the plan, the timeframes, the models, and the implementation. So any other dialogue at this time, recognizing that we're asking you to go think about this stuff some more and come back to us with comments. But are we good? Yes, Lenny.
I just have another little one in A, which is that it reads, continuing to improve the health of the population and improve consumers' engagement in and experience of care.
Okay. We changed it to consumers. Okay. Anything else before we keep going? Okay. In the next section, Section 5, we have taken a stab at laying out the strengths and challenges that we're facing in Maryland right now that would drive some of the thinking around the progression plan. It's, you know, the fact that Maryland has responsibility for the hospital payments, which makes up 56% of the Medicare payments in Maryland, and there's the total cost of care guardrail. But that we don't have the same kind of infrastructure and alignment and responsibility and accountability and focus on the other 44% of the spending, the Medicare spending specifically. So, you know, this is part of what's driving us to, or it will be part of what we need to think about as we're developing the plan. The current challenges at the bottom there are laid out. I'll just give you guys a chance to, anything you want to talk about on those?
Just a thought, Deb. This might be an opportunity for us to think about that section more broadly. I'm struck that earlier, the blue chart is really just focused on the metrics, and we have long said that the metrics are important, but this is about the transformation of care delivery. And I think about some of the letters that were recently sent to the Commission about the transformation that's underway. This might be a nice opportunity as we think about strengths and challenges to really think about descriptions of where we are in that delivery system transformation process. So some of these are obvious, but it might be a nice opportunity for us to try to describe some of the or less tangibles maybe, more than just the metrics.
And maybe we could even enhance some of the information at the beginning that gets into other aspects. We really, if we look at the driver diagram, we have an incomplete picture of how we're doing with what's here,
right?
And trying to get more information about how we're doing.
It's a nice sort of the qualitative. It's the place to take the qualitative aspects of. And even so much of the relationship building that's gone on in the last couple of years, I think are, for example, some of the strengths that we have here. I think we can maybe think a little more broadly. We'd be happy to help you.
Great. Okay. Any other comments on that, the strengths and the challenges? The next section lays out the guiding principles for the development of the plan itself. So, you know, what are the guiding principles as we start to put together the strategy for the next 5 years, or whatever the time frame is that we decide on that Maryland wants? And I mean, there's 12 of them. And again, I don't want to read them to you, but the basic ideas are around patient-centeredness, shared responsibility, where the payers, the providers, and accountable entities are working together, that we're creating alignment and collaborating, that we focus on the Medicare total cost of care as a starting point. That is a very important part of the all-payer model, right? I mean, that's the thing that we're getting judged against, and that's what it's going to take to sustain the current model. The fact that we need to set up mechanisms to help people understand total cost of care and start to take responsibility for total cost of care, and really creating more transparency and understanding and commitment and all of that to the idea of total cost of care in the state, where you're getting everybody to think about it and think about their part in contributing to it. I'm getting sighs over here, so I'm just giving a minute to see if we have a comment. I'm feeling it. Yes, Eric?
Just on the shared responsibility, you don't actually mention the consumer or the patient.
Okay.
They belong in the loop. We're talking about engaging them and being patient-centered. I don't have the magic sauce for how you make it happen, but certainly I think there's some responsibility that comes for the patient themselves.
Yeah. Yes.
I like the person-centered as the first one. I would just suggest adding social determinants should be addressed, maybe adding something like should be addressed through increased outreach and involvement of community in the process.
Okay.
Consumers and the community in the process.
Okay.
I don't have any issues with the Medicare total cost of care item as it stands, but I do think we have to keep in mind where the world seems to be going out there when I look around the country, which is ever-increasing cost shifting. And I think we run a real risk of making absolute statements, given that the stream that we're swimming in, the tide against us could get increasingly more difficult. I don't know how that will play out, but I do think this is a slippery slope potential for us to keep in mind.
Yes.
And perhaps I missed it here, but in terms of sharing information and data across all, to be able to do, what we want to do here in managing care.
Okay. I want to come back to you for just 1 second and make sure I'm understanding it. I thought maybe there was another comment on that. So you're saying that cost shifting is what's happening in the real world.
So we're saying the total cost of care in other words, we're setting up a test as though the Medicare payment rate drives everything, when that's not what drives everything in the real world. The way the budgets around the country are balanced is with cost shifting, and if that increases as being responsible for covering the nut, it is going to get, unless you think we are just so much able to be so much better than everybody else, I think we will put ourselves in a potential fiscal straitjacket this way.
Okay, so Donna, I'm going to give you do you have any response to that at this time, or we can just take that back and think about that, but I just want to see if there's any dialogue needed on that.
I think the issue is well understood, and it's been discussed many times over, and it needs to continue to be discussed many times over. So I think it's an ongoing topic, which is really about the ability to run an all-payer system with tight Medicare growth, and the ability to cost shift is not uniform across the country, and it's being reduced as we speak, because now that we've had the expansion of Medicaid, there's no cost shifting to Medicaid. So now we have Medicare and Medicaid, and we have an aging population, and so Medicare is increasing in terms of the percentage of revenue that it represents. So we're now up to 60 for the hospital, which is the piece that's all payer here. We're up to 60% Medicare and Medicaid, there's I think part of the reason that you see the national emphasis going on right now of trying to align models and metrics and et cetera and so forth is that there's a recognition that there's a point where you can no longer cost shift. When you get up to 60% Medicare and Medicaid, the ability to cost shift it starts to decrease, and it's still prevalent in some parts of the country, but even now, as we speak, there are areas of the country that they're not capable of shifting, and so they're having to tighten the belt as they face a 0% rate increase from Medicare. And so I think it's an ongoing discussion of, when do you hit that point where you can't balance a system, and if you hit that point, what do you need to do about it? And so we have a mechanism in our existing agreement with CMS that speaks to that. So I think making sure that we continue to pay attention to that mechanism while recognizing that it's to quote CMS in other meetings, that we have 49 states where we have models that have cost shifting. In Maryland, we don't, and so we don't want to have the 50th state focused on how to shift costs. So we need to make sure that we address it as aggressively as possible so that we're not emulating something that's not a good thing in the lower 49. So we'll stand on the high road.
Yeah, it's a very brave statement on their part.
I want to join in on that discussion, because I think I have to agree with Kevin. Cost shifting is happening, but I'm talking about a very liberal definition of cost shifting. But the care is being provided somewhere, and somebody is paying for it. And I think that in many cases, people may be going home faster, and they're being cared for by a loved one, and it's either out of pocket, or it's private duty, or it's not Medicare paid for, but we are paying for it out of pocket or in terms of lost worker productivity because people aren't at home. The care is being provided. And I want to emphasize, I think if there's an opportunity, we have to look at all the payer sources for post-acute care providers, because if we're not recognizing that Medicaid and private pay is a major motivator and payer source for long-term care, then we're gonna miss our total cost of care goals. Therapy, rehab, home health, they're all, still per diem. SNFs, still per diem, with a mixed payer source. So I think we have to look at this globally and look at all of those financial incentives that they're considering when they're operating their businesses, or we're just not going to make our goals.
Thank you. Eric?
I wanted to jump in support of what Kevin said, and one of the ways that I thought it could be addressed, and I had kind of made some notes on the vision section of the recommendations coming out of this body, but maybe they ought to find their way into this set of goals, or however you've put it in this document. And it has to do, so that the sentence that caught my eye, the council believes that there's huge value to the entire state of Maryland from the all-payer model, and that it must be retained. I don't think it needs to be retained at all costs, though. There's a point at which the hospital industry can't actually function. And I think that's the point that Kevin is getting to. And as Donna, you said, there are some relief valves, if you will, built into the agreement with CMS would allow HSCRC to do something. So the phrase that I was going to suggest we add to the end of it, and it could actually find its way into this section that we're talking about, as long as it is consistent with the HSCRC statutory mandate to provide adequate resources to allow well-managed hospitals to generate adequate operating margin. I don't think we can lose sight of that, and I don't think CMS can lose sight of it. I mean, at some point, we've squeezed ourselves so badly, and we all operate in a national labor market and a national technology market and a national drug cost market. If the whole rest of the country is going up by 3-4% because of those exogenous factors, you can't expect our industry to operate going up by 0 to 1%. It's not sustainable. There's a point at which we've taken, and I think we would all acknowledge utilization is high in Maryland, and particularly in Baltimore City, Baltimore County, but there's a point at which we've taken out a lot of excess utilization, and there's nothing left but the price lever. And when we get to that point, we can't be kind of myopic about what's happening in the rest of the country. So it's just a thought in terms of how to maybe address Kevin's piece.
Eric, could you read that quote? It was so good, but I didn't catch it.
I was going to ask Megan to go over there and
Jack,
get that quietly, Megan.
I'd be happy to email it.
Just email it.
Yeah, that'd be great.
That'd be great, because I didn't catch all the words, and it was very well stated.
Thank you.
Okay, are we good? Yes, Lenny?
Well, I don't want to disrupt the flow on total cost of care if anybody had comments, because I want to go back to the health disparity.
Okay, are we good with total cost of care? Ready to move on from that? Okay, go ahead, Lenny.
So I just wonder if a core principle isn't actually health equity, and that would then address the social determinants in A, and you highlight health disparities in 4. I'm not sure either of those are quite sufficient, but by pulling out as a principle health equity, I think you might get at that, and this would be a stronger piece for that purpose.
Okay, great. Okay, and we got benches, which is sharing data across all providers, all settings, right? Got that right? Okay. Yes, Carmela.
2 other thoughts, and we don't have to hash these out today. Number 10, I've read it a couple of times, and I'm still not sure what that means. That can be for a later date, but that would help me to understand more. And I'm wondering if there's not another one. Eric, I haven't written this down yet, so I don't have a nice way to say it. But I wonder if there's something, in thinking about Dr. Chaw's presentation tonight, is there something around kind of the goals need to be the goals, at least for some period of time? That is, we're halfway through the first phase of this model, and halfway through we're thinking about some pretty important potential changes and shifts, some of them being driven by things outside of the model, right, happening nationally, macro, other things like the request today to think about primary care models being driven from within. But I think as we begin to add physician pieces and post-acute care pieces, how do we make certain that that we kind of stick to the plan for a period of time, understanding we'll always be pressed by CMS to want to do more. But I think, I'm just wondering if there's a principle we could craft about kind of hanging on to timeframes and goals and objectives so we don't end up kind of moving this way. Just something for conversation and maybe.
And I do want to say on the primary care, in our application we did say that 80% of our people in the state of Maryland would be in a community integrated medical home, and that's how we were going to implement this model. So it's actually not the first conversation that Maryland has had with CMS about primary care, and so I don't think I wouldn't be and social determinants, because that whole conversation was around primary care and social determinants, and so I think I wouldn't want to say, oh wow, CMS is throwing us a new ball. This was the ball that we said that we were going to throw when we put the model in the last time, and you were involved in writing it, so you know that was part of the conversation. So I wouldn't want to characterize that as something new being thrown at us, kind of out of the blue. So I did want to say that, but
timeline is maybe a little bit out of the blue.
We can. Yeah, we can, and I do want to actually comment on this payer involvement issue, because maybe it's too nuanced, but it's basically saying, hey, if CMS wants to put a CPC Plus model out there, and if they want to create they're putting extra money into the model. It's 1.5% to 3% of total cost of care, depending on whether it's track 1 or track 2. Then they need to take some responsibility for that investment and make sure that that we're not trying to hold hospitals accountable for a new program coming into stream, that we have time to make the program work, and it's not somehow injected into the stream of accountability as we have these guardrails, and if we had some stream of 1.5% and 3% rolling in that they don't expect to have payoff for 3 or 4 years, I would be having a heart attack of trying to manage that. And so and then also the same thing goes with other payers. So I think, and that's and if other payers are getting involved in some of these Medicare activities, then we need to have some accountability for total cost of care outcomes. We have to be able to, and this is an ongoing discussion, but we need to be able to discontinue models that aren't working at some point in time. And that's a discussion, but we need to be able to shut them down and move to something that is working and not have them operating in perpetuity with some total cost of care thought process. If we're getting in the investment stream in front of some other states, just because we're where we are with our hospital model, we want that to be taken into account. So that's really.
You just said. I just didn't get that.
That was so. This is too nuanced, and maybe we need to be a little bit more direct and blunt about it.
I see a kind of cognitive dissonance or tension between the way I think, and this is my first exposure to Dr. Cha, so you all sit down and talk to him all the time and so on. But I think the way he sounded, the way he's thinking of it, is different from what I'm hearing of perhaps what some of you think the feds are coming at you with. I think his views seem to be, we have all these new incentive-based programs to incent people to move into alternative delivery systems, to plus and minus, and get rewarded if they practice medicine better. And we're throwing that at you not to add another thing that diverts you from meeting the goals of the all-payer, but to help you meet the goals. We think that by bringing the physicians in and then changing their incentives, you'll actually have an easier time. Now, that may be right or wrong. It certainly leaves the question of the pace. Gene's point, we got to catch our breath here. Do we have time to do it? But I think they think they're helping you. Whereas I think what I'm hearing elsewhere is, well, that's a whole new thing you're bringing up that will divert us from hanging on to the gains. So somehow so that it isn't two ships passing in the night, part of the progression plan, Deb, it seems to me, is to find a pace of implementing what CMS intends, I think, is a good thing that will help the model, that doesn't accidentally derail the model because it's more than can be absorbed.
I think that the issue of primary care goes back to a belief by many parties that a foundation of better chronic care ultimately has to have a strong primary care element to it. And so I think that's part of and it is part of what Maryland filed in the beginning, and so it's not like a new idea, and it's not coming out of left field. It's not, many people are of a belief that a strong primary care, we have people with 8 chronic conditions or 10 chronic conditions that we need I'll call it a quarterback in the process of implementing a better chronic care system. And so I think that's really going back to something that Maryland said from the beginning and saying, well, how are we going to execute on that? And, oh, by the way, MACRA is making it look like something you should do faster, but also just a belief that if you don't have a strong primary care base in a model, how will you execute on better chronic care? And so looking for that development early of how are you going to move forward with a better chronic care model in Maryland and primary care at a core. And so we should have the conversation, but it'll be, I would be surprised if a lot of people don't agree that there's a need for better, a strong primary care element. But that is, so it's not like a left field thing, I don't think.
Same with social determinants. That's always been.
No, I think this is all good discussion on things that need to get out on the table. Anything, I mean, so going back to the guidelines that we're going to, guiding principles as we develop the plan, the all-payer principles, I want to mention that one because it's one where we would start with Medicare as a priority, but as we're building the plan, we would ask ourselves to have a commitment to all-payer principles. There are certain things, and within a reasonable amount of time and under the right conditions, there are things that you could do more broadly than Medicare. And I think from the provider's perspective, and Jean, you can chime in here, that a lot of the providers who are caring for patients from many populations would appreciate the idea of having some level of consistency or, can you make this apply to something bigger than just Medicare, right? There's Medicare. Yesterday, the dual eligible work group, the stakeholder work group met. They are talking about ideas that could easily be leveraged into the progression plan and, really say to ourselves, as we're building, recognizing that Medicare is first, how do we say to ourselves, how can we make this apply more broadly when the time is right and the conditions are right?
I think that you put your finger on what troubles me about this, because I agree with you. I think we're caught in this vice because when we started this, we said, by God, if we could keep healthcare spending per capita, all in, all payers, all that, and at a growth rate that wasn't as high as the economy, or at least wasn't higher, that would be unbelievable. And I still think that's right. But, and I think it's very, very hard to do. And I think it will get harder because of what Donna said, which is we're going to have more and more people on Medicare. And however well you do about it, they are expensive. But then we turn around and we've spent more of this time on Medicare than on anything else. And we're of split mind on it because it is a little bit, the regulatory reach to get to everything outside of the hospitals is a big jump. That makes people anxious, as it should. But the notion of being whipsawed between Medicare and all payer also makes us anxious. And I think we need to kind of try to plot our path there. There's no perfect one, but I personally think that's at the heart of trying to figure out what we're going to do for the next 7 years. Was that original goal right? And if so, what does that mean? And if not, if we're going to, because we wanted to get away from, if you remember, a comparative goal other than against ourselves and our economy. And now we're spending an awful lot of time not on that, because the federal government can say, well, but you get all this extra money, and therefore we can jerk you around. I mean, effectively. And I just think that one needs to be called out. I don't have an answer, but I think it is a really important question.
In our progression plan, so I'm going to ask you a question. So we're going to put a progression timeline and plan in here. So do you think we should lay out a piece in the timeline for the plan of when we would develop all payer goals as opposed to just the Medicare piece of the progression, and not that we're forgetting about all payer, we actually have a particular piece for dual eligibles that we're planning to put in here, and we're thinking about all payer when we're doing CPC plus, and so there are a lot of pieces that really are all payer in the process. I think part of the hesitancy of spending huge amount of time into the weeds of it right now is that we have an aggressive timeline to get to December 31. And if we get on to talking about what it would mean to bring an all-payer view into sight, I don't feel like we would ever have a chance of hitting December 31 to file something. And so, nor could we develop a model for everything but we could lay out a timeline of when we want to discuss it and drive the principles forward. So, and it could give some time to see what happens with the Supreme Court ruling and what happens with the all-payer claims data, and it could give us some more. It is a complicated issue. So, just as a small example, without going down the rabbit hole, if we were really looking at all payer costs, then we really would need to be looking at insurance company administrative cost and collecting premium information. That's how other folks do it. It's not just provider cost. And so now we're into a whole nother world of politics. And so I feel like we have a really aggressive work to do to get to December 31, and stepping into the payer world of politics right this second would be really more than we could take on. And not just that, but we don't have the data collection to do any of that by December 31. Eric?
I agree with that, and I wouldn't even want to put a time frame around it. And putting on my payer hat as opposed to provider hat, I think Vince would agree with me that we chafe every time the state who is paying us a fixed payment to care for their beneficiaries then comes in and prescribes, methodologies and so forth that we should implement. It happens more in the District of Columbia than it does here, but they come up with stuff that actually works at variance to stuff that we're already doing, and it takes some time to talk them down and say, guys, we're already doing stuff. So I'm very reluctant for us, but for the reasons you say, I don't see how we could possibly do that in between now and December 31st.
Yeah, we've looked into a little bit what Massachusetts does, and they have 140 state staff people working on all of that, and we have 37. So that's a little bit of a disparity, not to speak of data collection. So I think
how many of them are in PR?
I think a lot.
So do I.
So they have about the same population as Maryland. They have 1 million more people. That's it.
And they don't have one insurer that controls all the market.
And anyway, so you, I think you can see the obvious reasons. I think this is the obvious reasons why we can't get into this discussion this year, because we quickly go down the rabbit hole. But we are in active discussions and intend to include in the plan what's being done with the dual eligibles work group, because that's part of our December 31 plan that's being worked on. So and that'll come back into the conversation here, but that is part of the joint planning process that we're working on together, and trying to make sure that we're integrating and incorporating.
Okay, our facilitator is telling me that we need to wrap this up. So let me just say, on the rest of, these guiding principles for the development of this plan are important, and so we're asking you to look at these and give us your comments on these. Then sections 7, 8, and 9 are, to be filled in. For instance, on the model progression plan elements, we need to decide, will we have a primary care strategy? Will we have a post-acute strategy? Will we have a long-term care strategy? What other strategies? What are the components and the elements that we're actually going to lay out in this strategy? And these are things that we need to get your feedback on, and we're going to need to work on and think about and get into the strategy. Looking at the driver diagram, what you saw at the beginning of this document was something we pulled right out of the original application. We need to look at it and say, how are we going to adjust the driver diagram for the next 5 years of the model, and then the timeline. I mean, where we sit down and say, okay, by when are we going to look at which model, if we're going to do a primary care model, by when give consideration to that model? By when are we going to give consideration to the post-acute model? Whatever it is we decide the elements are, what is the timeline that we're going to commit to CMS that we're actually going to give consideration to those ideas and think about doing something and most likely do something. Even though we're not committing to the actual doing of it, we're committing to the serious consideration of it. So we're going to need to continue this discussion and get your comments and feedback. Donna, anything you want to say to wrap up this part of the discussion?
Yeah, I think just, absorbing the document that we have here and giving comments and feedback would be in email is great to get some more thoughts on that. And I think, we've been working on just some straw model or straw ideas to put into the other sections, but do we have all the sections in here that we would need? Do we need more sections? Are we missing anything? Get ready to think about what should go under those areas with what timeline attached to them. But we have been working on some things, and we may shoot out some of that thought process to various folks during the next, I think we have a meeting in another month, but get some input on what might go in those sections to start getting that filled in as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Deb, for leading us through that, and to all of you for useful additions and modifications. And as Donna said, the dialogue is still open for your contributions. It's now time for me to turn to Vinny for an update. We have 2 items left on the agenda, and they're both important. Vinny will give us an update on his activities, and then we will have the public comment period, and then we'll wrap up. Yes, Stan.
I just wanted to say, Deb, I think you did a terrific job.
Well, thank you, Sam. Thank you.
Extremely useful, clear, not an end product, but a really terrific step.
And Dr. Edwards called in a little bit after we did announcements, so can we just make sure she gets credit?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make sure she got credit for being here.
Well, yes.
If we're keeping track of attendance.
Yes, I apologize. I didn't know you were on. Okay, duly noted. Yes, duly noted, and thank you for staying with us. And I'm sorry I didn't know that you were on, and same to Bruce. Vinny, and then public comments.
Thank you, Jack. I just wanted to make sure everyone knew, you may have heard about it. On Tuesday, we launched the Breath of Fresh Care campaign, which is really, I should do that. Thank you. Thank you. On Tuesday, we launched the Breath of Fresh Care campaign, which is a way to really educate the public and get consumers involved in health system transformation in Maryland. And we joined Maryland Hospital Association, AARP Maryland, NAACP of Maryland, and Young Invincibles, and some faith leaders in an event which got some good press coverage, which is in the pack, and Baltimore Sun, Daily Record. In addition, Channel 2 and Channel 11 had really good spots about it. And I really liked the term Breath of Fresh Care, which MHA came up with, and Carmela's left, but I want to thank her and her staff. It's, I think, a really good title for what we're doing that's understandable by consumers, and the website is terrific. I encourage everybody to look at it, and as you see from the packet I gave out on the press release, consumers will see on that website the hospital patient bill of rights and information on how to navigate systems in each hospital that they need for population health. And so I think it's a very important way to bring what we're doing to the public. And our next step, I mentioned before, but now we're really getting into it, is a series of forums across the state. And we had a really successful series of forums last year, and now we're going to start again. And the first one is on September 14th in the evening, hosted
hosted by MedChi. Thank you, Gene. In the packet is a flyer for that forum, plus the agenda for the first forum. And as you can see, we're going to have a really broad discussion from groups who really know how to talk with consumers, like the AARP, NAACP, 1199, and Young Invincibles will all be there. And Dr. Herrera Scott is going to be there to talk about what's going on with Hopkins and their grant they got from the HSCRC. And Carolyn Katraki will be there to talk about open enrollment, and Shannon McMahon about Aaron Traki from the Health Benefit Exchange, Shannon McMahon from Health Department about Medicaid. So we really want the public to know what's going on in healthcare, and also to hear public feedback like we did last time. And then we're going to give an update on the Faith Health Network. And by the way, we took out the word community because it was getting on people's garbled lips. So it's Maryland Faith Health Network, and our project with LifeBridge, which is going very, very well. In the last page on the packet is a list of the now 59 congregations which have signed a memorandum of understanding with LifeBridge, and there are now, as of today, I just went to a church in Carroll County to launch there. We have over about 550 individuals who are part of the network, and about a dozen of these congregations are actually enrolling their individuals in the congregations in the network. LifeBridge, and we agreed with this, wanted to start slow, get the system working, and now we hope in the fall to get as many more of these congregations doing that. So hopefully we will have many more individuals involved. There's a lot more to talk about, but we hope that by the end of the year we're going to start engaging other hospitals in building this network around the state. We've talked with many other hospitals who are interested, and Carmel is working with us on a statewide memorandum of understanding for hospitals. And one of the purposes of these forums is to educate the public and hospital leaders and faith leaders about what the Faith Health Network is. So September 14th is the first one in Baltimore City, and Dr. Lena Wen will be there. Either Van Mitchell or Dr. Haft will represent the state. There's another one on October 18th in Baltimore County, October 19th in Montgomery County, and we are hoping to have them all across the state. I don't want to take too much time, but I just want to say I want to really thank Donna for referring Tiffany Tate to us, because she has been terrific in helping us make this system work in a way that is even, I think, going to be much better than what's happening in Memphis, which is going very well. And what Tiffany is teaching us is how to get the liaisons in the congregation actually doing, communicating with the former patients in a way that is evidence-based and will help improve health. Just small things like encouraging the liaisons to ask the former patients, have you taken your prescription? Have you done your follow-up visit? Have you talked to your provider? Have you found a provider? And we also are going to be tracking that in ways that are really good. And the exciting thing is that the leaders in the congregations, much to my surprise, said, yes, we want to do that. We want to do evidence-based work like that. So I believe the Maryland Faith Health Network, as I said in the beginning, and I believe it even more now, is going to substantially improve population health in Maryland and help achieve all the goals of health system transformation. And I hope in a year or so to give you a full report on a lot of progress.
Well, thank you, Vinny. It's exciting work, and at the grassroots level, it's good to hear about the enthusiastic participation of not only so many community-based organizations and citizens, but also the state leaders and city leaders. It's amazing. Thank you. It's great. Thanks for the update. Okay, it's now time. We have our usual 15 minutes exactly for public comment, questions, commentary from those of you who have sat here patiently for nearly 3 hours. If you have any thoughts, please raise your hand and come on forward. Well, this might be a first, but that's okay. Going once? Okay, I think maybe we don't have any, which is fine. Thank you for attending. You're always welcome to comment at future meetings. Any final comments?
I don't think I have any final comments. Just send on that feedback and help us get the outline filled out so that we can have a good, productive next meeting.
Good. And as you know, I always end by, thank you. My last comment is always my most important comment, which is the next meeting is August 1st. I always try to remember that. Thank you for coming today.
Jack, is that at the same time, same place?
MHA.
Thank you.
Okay. You'll be getting some materials on that.
Everything's going. It's already on my calendar.